In a tiny two-bedroom house on Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana, a revolution was brewing. But it wasn't fueled by sunshine and dreams. It was fueled by ironclad discipline, relentless rehearsal, and a father who refused to let his children become another statistic of the streets. Joe Jackson wasn't just a father. He was a taskmaster with a vision so intense it would eventually conquer the world. Joe's rules were legendary, and for his children, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, Michael, Randy, Rebby, Latoya, and Janet, those rules were the law of the land. There were no after-school sports. There were no neighborhood friends. There was only the music, the choreography, and the crushing weight of perfection. Joe Jackson turned a group of siblings into a precision-tuned machine known as the Jackson 5. And in doing so, he created the greatest entertainer the world has ever seen. But at what cost? Today, we are looking at the rules that built an empire and broke a family. We're examining how Joe's tough love shaped Michael's genius, Janet's independence, and the deep-seated trauma that the Jackson family still carries in 2026. This isn't just a story about pop music. It's a story about the thin line between a mentor and a monster. Before we pull back the curtain on the Jackson household, we need your help to keep these deep dives alive. We're on a mission to reach our next subscriber goal by the end of the month. If you're fascinated by the hidden history of music icons, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. Your support allows us to keep digging for the truth. Already part of the family? Drop a comment. Do you think the Jackson 5 would have ever made it without Joe's strict rules? Let's get into the blueprint. Childhood in a sandbox of steel. The first and most famous rule in Joe Jackson's house was simple: no play. While other kids in Gary were playing baseball or hanging out on front porches, the Jackson brothers were inside, practicing. Joe would often sit in a chair with a belt in his hand while the boys rehearsed. If someone missed a step or hit a flat note, the belt was used. Joe's logic was born from the harsh reality of the 1960s. He worked grueling shifts at a steel mill and saw firsthand what happened to young black men who didn't have a focus. To Joe, play was a luxury his children couldn't afford. He treated their talent like a ticket out of poverty, and he wasn't going to let a game of tag stand in the way of a Motown contract. Michael Jackson would later recount looking out the window of their recording studio at kids playing in a park across the street and crying because he couldn't join them. This rule changed the family forever by stripping away their normalcy. It created a group of adults who were world-class performers but struggled with the basic social cues of childhood. Michael, in particular, spent the rest of his life trying to reclaim the childhood Joe took away, eventually building Neverland as a literal monument to the play he was denied. The death of Dad. One of the most chilling rules Joe enforced was that his children were forbidden from calling him Dad or Daddy. They had to call him Joseph. This wasn't just about ego, it was about authority. Joe wanted to ensure there was no confusion about who was in charge. By removing the father label, he transformed the relationship from a familial bond into a business partnership. He was the manager. They were the talent. This rule had a devastating psychological impact. It created an emotional distance that never truly healed. For Michael, the fear of Joseph was so physical that he reportedly felt nauseous or even fainted just by being in his father's presence well into his adult years. Janet Jackson also spoke about how this distance made her feel like she had to work twice as hard to earn his approval, not as a daughter, but as a performer. By enforcing the Joseph rule, Joe Jackson successfully built a professional empire, but he sacrificed the emotional safety of his home. The children grew up feeling like they were products on a shelf rather than members of a family. This led to a lifelong cycle of the siblings seeking validation from the public because they never truly received it from the man in the big chair. Rehearse until you drop. In the Jackson house, good was never good enough. Joe's perfection protocol meant rehearsing for 5 or 6 hours straight after a full day of school. He would watch their feet, their hands, and their facial expressions. He taught them that the stage was a battlefield, and the only way to survive was to be better than everyone else. This relentless drive is exactly what made the Jackson 5 stand out at the Apollo Theater and later at Motown. Their synchronization was uncanny. While other groups look like kids having fun, the Jacksons look like professionals twice their age. But this rule created a family of workaholics. It instilled a perfection or failure mindset that drove Michael to push his body to the absolute limit and led Janet to become one of the most disciplined performers in history. However, it also meant that the siblings were often in competition with one another. Joe would frequently pit the brothers against each other to see who could perform better, creating rifts that would lead to decades of public feuds and legal battles over the Jackson legacy. The Perfection Protocol changed the family by making them the most successful musical dynasty in history, but it also made it impossible for them to ever just be. They were always on, always performing, and always terrified of making a mistake. Us against the world. Joe's final major rule was isolation. He didn't want outside influences corrupting his vision. He kept the family tight-knit, almost to a fault. He was the only manager they were allowed to have for years, and he controlled the finances, the bookings, and the public image. This created a bunker mentality. The Jacksons felt like it was them against the world. While this made them incredibly loyal to the brand, it made it very difficult for them to trust anyone outside the family. As they grew older and tried to break away like Janet did with her Control album, Joe fought back with everything he had. He saw their independence as a betrayal of the rules that got them out of Gary. This isolation is why, even today, the Jackson family remains one of the most private and protective circles in Hollywood. They were taught from birth that the only people you can trust are the ones with the Jackson surname, and even then you have to be careful. The legacy of Joseph Jackson. Joe Jackson died in 2018, but his rules still govern the family's shadow. He was a man of contradictions, a father who beat his children but also gave them the world, a man who was feared by his sons but respected for his results. Without Joe's strict rules, there is no Thriller. There is no Rhythm Nation. There is no Moonwalk. The world would have been deprived of a musical evolution that changed the planet. But the cost was a family that spent decades in therapy, a son who changed his face to look nothing like his father, and a legacy of what-ifs. Joe Jackson didn't just change the Jackson family, he changed the Dina of entertainment. He proved that greatness could be manufactured through discipline, but he also proved that a crown of gold can be very heavy to wear. Ultimately, Joe Jackson's rules highlight the ultimate trade-off of the American dream. If this look into the Jackson family's history gave you a new perspective on your favorite hits, make sure to hit that like button. It helps more people find our deep dives. And if you want more stories about the legends of music and the truth behind the fame, click subscribe and join our community.